Warning, contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised.
Commenting again on the Enagage podcast with Jonathan Pageau, and I'm starting about minute 20. What this is about, Pageau lays out exactly sort of the nature of reality from a historical, philosophical perspective, in my opinion. And the host has it labeled as, Plato and Aristotle's role in Christianity, and then he goes on to address the problem of perennialism. I don't think we're going to get to the problem of perennialism because we're probably going to stick with Plato and Aristotle's role in Christianity. I just think what Pageau says here is exactly what I've been thinking lately, and I've been thinking, am I wrong to think of it this way? The East and West wasn't as divided as we like to think of it as divided. I mean, there are definitely differences, and I'm finding Nishitani a great guide to help me understand the differences between Eastern and Western thought. And of course, I'm reading Nishitani because John Vervaeke mentioned his book, Religion and Nothingness, which is just what I guess I picked up last year and started reading it. But I picked it up again recently, and I've been finding it really helpful in getting across the differences and similarities between the Eastern and Western thought. So let's hear what Jonathan has to say about Aristotle and Plato and early Christianity.
But yeah, that's a very good point. You mentioned Plato and Aristotle, which is funny because
I'm including the host's entire question because I really like the way he phrased the question and the points he brings up.
That's something I wanted to get into as well, because something that I found in trying to people reframe religion is to kind of expose the philosophy in a more explicit manner, because then in my experience, and I can tell this from my own perspective as well, that immediately gets some respect from it, and it kind of transcends the binary reception that people have to religion, which is like there's X claim, and this X claim is either scientifically accurate or inaccurate. And so if you look through religion through that lens, like you're just not gonna find very much. But if you force people to think a bit more philosophically, then people they're forced to think about it. They can't just say, oh, that's superstition. Like there's actually serious problems that you need to think about. And I'm curious about how Christianity took from the Platonic tradition and from Aristotle, from the potential and the essences and stuff like that. I can see it very clearly with Plato especially, but Aristotle I'm less familiar, except like a pop introduction. So if you could elaborate on that, I think that would be helpful.
Well, the first thing to mention, and the first thing that's important to mention is that Plato and Aristotle do not exist in a vacuum. They didn't just come up with their thing. And even in their own text, and even in the text of the Neoplatonists especially, they refer that a lot of their wisdom came from other places, came from the East, came from India. And so we tend to we have this weird idea that Plato just came up with this stuff like out of his own thinking. Even if you read Plato's text, he talks about being initiated. He talks about, he might have been a Pythagorean initiate. And around Greece, there were the Pythagoreans who were in contact with Vedantic.
I'm going to pause him here just for a second because it just reminded me of Vanderklay's recent videos about psychedelics. I don't know how recent that is. Maybe it's been a month or two. But I don't know. I don't understand why Vanderklay seemed to be resistant to the fact that the early church was likely commingling with various mystery cults that had various, like you said, rites of initiation, which, may have been involving hallucinogenics. I understand Vanderklay's point that there's a religio associated to some psychedelics that we don't understand, and to approach it naively is, it's kind of stupid to do that way. So I understand that. But I don't understand why he seemed resistant to the idea that there was commingling of ideas and experiences in that time and place on Earth. I think it's just undeniable. It's part of our historical, philosophical, lineages, as I think Pageau is describing here, although Pageau's not taking that slant. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he's giving us a similar construction.
Scholars and with people from the East. And so this weird idea of that Plato just exists is just not just his idea just kind of came out of his thinking is baloney, first of all. And that's really important to understand, right? It's important to understand that there are analogies in Platonism with other traditional thought, with thought from Vedanta and India, with thought from even what we find in the Bible, right? That there are analogies that are there. And it's not just that one influenced the other. It's that both of them are trying to express some aspects of reality and are doing it in conversation with each other. It's just weird how people understand how the ancient world existed. The letters of the Greek alphabet were Phoenician. They had lost their own writing and they had to borrow Semitic letters in order to re-establish their own writing. And so the idea that there's no relationship between Semitic thought and Platonic thought is so patently absurd. They were in constant contact with each other. Intellectuals were constantly engaging with each other's thought. Anyways, so that's one thing. And so second of all, you can, like I said, one of the things that, let's say, Platonic and Aristotelian thought did was give Christianity in Greek words that they could use to express these patterns and to talk about reality. And so the Neoplatonists, especially the Neoplatonists, they had found ways also to synthesize some of Plato's and Aristotle's ideas. And they were able to find words, and we use those words in the Christian tradition. When we talk about, for example, when we use the word homoousion, when we say that the Son is of the same nature as the Father, let's say, we're using words that are from Greek philosophy. When we talk about logos, we're using words from Greek philosophy. But the notion of logos didn't come from Plato. That is insane to think that. Right? It is insane to think that. There are analogies to the notion of logos in Chinese culture, in Indian culture, in every culture, because it's a representation of how reality manifests itself, right? And how there are principles in reality that manifest. You can see, it's like when you look at something as a human person, you can see the thing, but you can see the pattern in the thing. Right? Why is it that you know that a chair is a chair? And how is it that you know that all the different chairs participate in the same pattern of chair? We notice that. Why do we think that two chairs are the same thing? They're two objects, but we say both of them, we name them chair, and they're different from each other. They're not the same. One can be blue, one can be bigger, one can be small, one can have, but we all use the same name, chair. And so there's a pattern there. There's a pattern which is, we use the word above, but it's just it's an image. There's a pattern which is beyond the particular manifestations. And that's what Plato was noticing. He's like, there has to be these essences that are above things, because how could I know that the things are things? And how could I differentiate things if there weren't patterns that help me to do that? And like I said, how can I say that Athens is something? Like, how can I name that? How can I name a city? It's a million things. It's buildings and people and all kinds of stuff and a constitution and laws and blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, I'm able to pull away from that and to say Athens. I name it like a mass of millions of details. I'm able to name into one name, one essence. Okay. And so he notices that. And the problem is how to work it out so that we can, to help us understand how that works. And so Plato and Aristotle both trying to propose their solution. Plato said that there are these essences, these eternal patterns that are above the world, that are, let's say, before the world, and now the world is manifesting those patterns, right? If there weren't patterns, then like I said, if there wasn't an aspect of what Plato said was true, then how do we even know that? How do we engage with the world? Like, how do we know things exist? Especially things that are more abstract. It's like, how do I recognize virtue? Or how do I recognize pride? So I have all these people, millions of people who have behaviors, and then all of a sudden I can say, oh, that's pride. And I can recognize it across different peoples and across time. And I say that has a being. And then I can name it. It's pride. It's a pattern of being, right? So there has to be these patterns somehow. Now the problem is, like, what is this? Where are they? So Aristotle, his solution was to say, it's not that these patterns exist independently, like that they exist somewhere, whatever that means, but rather that they exist only in their instantiation. So he tended to focus mostly on the instantiation of the pattern. And so that they exist in their instantiation. But there's a tension there between emphasizing the instantiation, the body, you could say, and then emphasizing the essence, right? And then if you want to know, that's all of philosophy, basically. It's the whole problem of philosophy, right? And so what Christianity does is that Christianity balances it out in what you could call incarnational thinking, which is that it's not like Plato, where we think that the essences are outside of the world. And what you need to do is to get out of the world, right? And so that's the allegory of the cave, right? You're sitting, everything you see, everything you experience is an illusion. It's a pale reflection of actual reality. So you need to escape the world in order to have an experience of the pure patterns, of the pure ideas, okay? So that's what Plato was advocating. But the let's say the Christian perception is that those shadows are not shadows. They're the instantiations of that pattern. The things in the world are filled up with logos.
And this is the primary thing I got out of my psychedelic experiences. Again, I hate to interrupt Jonathan right in the middle of his thought, but what he said just perfectly described the intuition I brought back from the psychedelic experience, which was that this existence in, like he's talking about, the incarnated existence, is about putting certain things into perspective, like looking through a lens through which you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And if you're not incarnated, then you are actually missing something. And this sounds like what do you call it? Some argumentation that, if God is perfect, then he must be instantiated and not just an idea. Who said something like that? Anselm or something. But it sounds like I'm saying that, but I'm not sure if I'm saying that. I'm trying to say Jonathan says it just 100 times better. That there is something about existence, maybe in John Vervaeke's language, the perspectival way of knowing and the participatory way of knowing. It seems like this might be the only way that shines forth and that we experience what Jonathan's talking about.
Without logos, they don't exist. Without essence, things don't exist. They scatter into quantum potential. Let's use a modern world. They scatter down into potentiality. They don't cohere. You need these patterns. But then when we get the sense,
and you might say, now I'm trying to think of this in a Bernardo Kastrup way, an analytical idealism. So when we take psychedelics, our brain is apparently going into a lower state of activity, and Bernardo Kastrup says, well, when we die, our brain also goes into a lower and lower states of activity until there's zero activity. Now, psychedelics don't allow us to experience the zero activity part, but it does allow us to experience what that lower state of activity might be. And I think, is it true also when we meditate and when we sleep, there's a difference in the type of brain waves that are occurring? Anyway, maybe that's besides the point. So the psychedelic experience, according to Kastrup, is bringing you closer to your death state, and what I think he believes the death state is like is this sort of super powerful experience of love that Christians might talk about. And it is the big secret of death, and this is my takeaway from this, is that the big secret of death is that it is so powerfully, it's such a powerful experience of love and joy, and like basically everything the Christians talk about when they talk about like being united with God. And Kastrup, I believe, sees it as your body, Jonathan is saying here, sort of loses its pattern. Your being, your consciousness loses its pattern, and it is then returned to the greater pattern Kastrup would call, I guess, the mind at large. And that would be, I think, what the Christian would call like returning, like being united with God or something. And I think, I'm like I said, I'm reading about Nishitani, and he brings up Meister Eckhart a lot. And I think I'm trying to understand Nishitani, but it sounds like he's saying Meister Eckhart sort of reached states of awareness. You know, you could say I'm a noob, that seemed like they were kind of attaining that union. So again, that's a Western version of a Eastern idea of a meditative state, such that you are uniting with being itself. Anyway, I'm rambling.
When we encounter a being, that's the instantiation of the pattern. So it's not a negative perception of reality. It's not a negative perception of the world. It's a positive perception of the world. Because the only place where you can encounter the patterns are in their instantiations.
And now, if you want to think of a Don Hoffman perspective, and again, I could be pulling wildly wrong conclusions, or making inferences that are just totally off base. And that's why I'm kind of curious, and that's why I'm kind of talking about it here, because I know somebody will probably say, no, you're totally wrong, and you're misinterpreting things. What does death look like from a Don Hoffman perspective, where we lose our pattern, and the consciousnesses that were compiled to create our so-called egoic singular consciousness just loses its pattern and returns to the bigger pattern, the larger pattern of the universe or mind at large, or it would be, from his perspective, the interface. So now what happens is our pattern joins the pattern of the interface. So is that like, what is that like? Is that like us moving? Is that what it means to move from one life to let's say the life we know here to the life you might know there, as part of the interface, like what Kastrup says? What Kastrup might say would be that final union of like ultimate love and joy and so forth and fulfillment that a Christian might also speak of.
The reason why the patterns exist are to be incarnated, right? There's no purpose of having an ideal chair.
Another way to phrase it, to know, like, so we know the interface from this side of it, and perhaps Kastrup and Hoffman might, the way I'm understanding it, suggest that death could be the way to know the interface from the other side.
Without actual chairs.
Right.
What's the point of having a heavenly pattern of a chair without chairs you can sit on? And so that's the compromise that Christianity gives. It's the incarnational principle, you could say.
And would you say that synthesis was present in the very early church based on the narrative of Christ, or was that a more modern interpretation after Aquinas tried to kind of put Aristotle back into theology? Was that
No,
there
not
all along?
Aquinas. You don't need Aquinas for that at all. Like, it's already there in Athanasius. It's there right at the beginning. If you read Saint Irenaeus, you already have that. You know, if you read the very, very early church fathers, you already have this notion. But one of the things that Christianity does as well, and that's something people don't understand, is that because it is incarnational, because what it's proposing is incarnational, the manner in which it proposes it is incarnational as well. So Christianity is not a bunch of theories about reality. Christianity is a mode of being. It's a way of living your life. It's a way of existing in the world. It's a connection to a story, but a story that you live in. So it's not me sitting in my couch thinking about Christianity and thinking about, you know, how this solves Plato's problem of this or that. That's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be, this is how you live in the world to fully realize what this is about, like what incarnational existence is about. And so the solution that Christians give is love. They say, love, that's how the world exists.
Right. That's actually something that took me quite a while to realize, and you helped me a lot of this participatory modes of being that is emphasized in Christianity. But part of the problem about that way of being is that you can't commit to the way of being if you don't believe in it. And it's hard to believe in it if you don't understand it. And so it helps to kind of deconstruct the
I love the host, and his questions are like, they're really, really sharp questions. And I hope he has another conversation with Pageau and they can talk for a longer time. But I wonder what he really means by that you have to believe in something. And what are you believing in? A set of propositions? Is it propositional belief that we're talking about? Because I think the answer comes in like the belief that it's it's not a belief. It is like Jonathan says. It's living in a story. It's living out a story, or
value of the story, so that people can participate in the story.
No, I agree, and that's why I do what I do. Because also I think that, let's say, the type of person that I'm talking to is usually a slightly more intellectual type person, someone who studied in college or whatever, you know, and so. For a simple person, let's say for my aunt or my grandmother or whatever, they don't need as much. You know, they have this experience and they experience, let's say, the story, and they kind of, you know, and then it's enough for them. But it's true that for a lot of more intellectual type people, they have a barrier, which is their own understanding. And they think, you know, and also my aunt is a barrier to that person. Because they see my aunt, they see she's stupid, and they think, well, I'm not like her, and I'm not going to accept the things that stupid people accept, right? And so that's a barrier. And so that it's true that that's one of the barriers I'm trying to break, is to help people see that, you know, just because your aunt doesn't understand the full mystery of Christianity doesn't mean it's not there. You know, you just have to look at to the right people to find the working out of these issues in a.
This to me reminds, I hate breaking up Jonathan again in mid-sentence, but this reminds me of what it appears to be like when you achieve like some kind of enlightened state. The enlightened state is not like monastic life or something. It's more like bringing the people out of the monastery and into the fields, and, you know, having them directly grow their food and so on and so forth, like a very at oneness with very simple living. Like, I guess what you might say, like, I guess if you could look at us in a stage of very primitive animal-like unconsciousness, like maybe that's what the Garden of Eden was like, where because Jordan Peterson relates the awakening that Adam has in the garden to like a self-consciousness, so he becomes self-aware all of a sudden. So, you know, perhaps going on that view, before that we were more like animals, you know, but you could see so much behavior from animals that seems intelligent, and so much of our behavior doesn't require most of our consciousness, right? And this is the kind of freaky thing that I think Kurzweil mentions a few times when he gives his speeches about consciousness, that you could be driving somewhere and you can have a total lapse of consciousness where you got from point A to point B and you weren't even aware of what the heck was going on. You were just automatically driving, basically. And this is like a common place example to point people to the fact that you can do a lot of your daily life without your full concentration or attention, if you want to put like a more McGilchrist spin on it. The way you are modulating your attention when you're driving, Vervaeke gets into that with the flow state. If you make a mistake, there's high impact, high consequences, and you're utilizing so many of your senses sort of at like peak performance. Is not tunnel vision, for example. You don't want to have eagle eye tunnel vision when you're driving. You actually have to balance your concentrated tunnel vision with your peripheral vision, and you have to balance your vision with your hearing, and you have to balance what you hear with what you're feeling with the steering wheel. Let's say if there's icy conditions and whatnot. There's just so much that is coordinated, and it's mostly what you might say unconsciously coordinated. Once you learn how to coordinate your consciousness or your attention, how to coordinate your attention such that you're sort of able to go into a focus and out, like, so you go into a fine-grained focus and you pull out to going from higher to lower resolution views. I think that's what Jordan Peterson says. Again, very useful language. As I'm trying to grasp for language to talk about what I'm trying to refer to, it's going from high to low resolution. And I see that as that's like the right hemisphere sending out left hemisphere, or tagging the left hemisphere to do tasks of conceptualizing, of abstracting, of making models of the world, and then it has to go back to the right hemisphere to sort of process the Gestalt whole and how the model fits into all the other models that are going on. Loosely speaking, of course.
In a more profound manner.
Right. Something that I would like you to explore is, how does Christianity view other religions? Because when I'm thinking